Welcome back to Stats 7 Sports. I am Contain Kunas, and welcome to March Madness. This is the very first day of March as college basketball becomes the big picture story of all the sports. Even before NBA becomes the biggest picture in a couple months, once the playoffs come around, and whenever the NFL Combine going into the NFL Draft becomes the biggest story. But considering that bracket season is coming up and everyone's going to be able to try to figure out who's getting in, who's going to be the bubble teams, who's going to be out, and all of that, let me give you a little idea on how the whole system goes, for the fact that the bracket committee used to go off of basically strictly RPI plus a few other factors, strength of schedule, all of that. Now, just end up kind of going away from one of the issues with the RPI is it didn't take into account how wide a blowouts are. Oh, like it took into account point differential too much. At this with the net system, there is a cap on how much you can actually beat an opponent, to where after that it's just set at a certain scale. Well, I'll end up going over that in a quick bit. So based off of this, it's five determining factors. You have your team index value, which each of your games, it's how your the rating of your opponent, where it's being played, if it's home game or road game, and if you actually win or lose the game. It's going to be set up between like four quadrant games, where that's not going to really change too much off of the RPI system. Now, another thing they actually pay attention to, and this does help for some of the mid-majors that have very strong records, where like Gonzaga, like Dayton, like San Diego State, I'll speak on them later, but teams that have very strong offensive efficiencies against opponents' defensive efficiencies, against their own defensive efficiencies. And a team's defensive efficiency is based off of their opponent's offensive efficiency. How good a team is on defense is based off of how well they can stop their opponents on offense. There. That seems like a little bit of a tongue twister. That makes it a little bit more simpler. Then after that, your third fact goes off of a winning percentage, then adjusted winning percentage based off of, you're going to get more benefit of the doubt where if you win a game on the road than if you win a game at home field advantage, they still take into account that. And same thing with neutral games. It's not as much of a factor for neutral games, especially wherever they have the kind of the overseas tournaments in the middle of the seasons off of that before conference play. And then, as I was saying earlier, the scoring margin, they capped it out at 10 points for it. So if you end up getting a game that's 82-56, that's essentially in the bracket, in the tournament bracket committee's eyes, they're going to count that as a 10-point victory, because that's still a very comfortable win. So you do get some of the coaches that kind of want to understand it analytically, to where they're worried about the committee seeing them in a better light to be able to get a better seed in the tournament, where there's going to be coaches that are going to be disappointed whenever they're up 5. Yeah, whenever they're up 5 and then a three-pointer gets hit at the very end, because there is a difference between getting a 5-point win and getting a 1-possession win. The 5-point win gives them more marks towards them. Positive marks, yes. Now, just to kind of see an example of what you would see on like net team sheet, I'm going to end up going through like the top 3 teams of the SEC. Now, this is going to be based off of data that was back at February the 12th. For the fact is, that's whenever the initial top 16 rankings were made. So if you end up seeing on this, it's going to separate between the different type of metrics, a strength of record, a BPI, a bunch of other metrics off of that, to where they're going to end up averaging pretty much all that together between all the other 360 plus teams that are in the NCAA basketball, and they're going to give you that net score. For Auburn, it's going to be 15, and as you can see at the point of this video, Auburn, they were considered a 3 seed. May have seen a little high based off the net there, but it doesn't just base off the net. It also does base off of how your quadrant 1 wins go. It's gonna be like net wins, your net metric plus all your quadrants, where it's like quadrant 1's gonna get higher brackets. Quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4 are going to get less value. And then because the net's going to go more off of efficiency, strength of record, all that. Efficiency, win percentage, those 5 factors I spoke of earlier. Now, as you go further down on, we go with Kentucky, the current SEC championship winner, but at the time of this one being of this net sheet, this was actually the most recent that I had available to me. As you're seeing on there, they're separating the quadrants into 3 different sections. Quadrant 1's being put together from 1 to 30, 1 to 50, and 1 to 75. So they're separating that between three quadrants in 3 different divisions in quadrant 1, 3 in quadrant 2, 3 and 4. Where Kentucky has 1 very bad loss against Evansville, where their net is 264, but then it's like only 1 quad 2 loss and 3 quad 1 losses, where it's like the quality losses, if you call them that, like there is such a thing as not a bad loss. You're not going to get hit too badly if you lose to some of these teams, like in their case, they had lost to, let's see, like they lost to Auburn, they lost to Ohio State, Auburn on the road, South Carolina on the road, which was the lower part of quad 1, and at the time, this information has changed since then, but all in all, that's how it is. And then for third place in the SEC right now, Kentucky would be a 4 seed as of that moment. Their net score was 20, so that makes a little bit more sense. It's not all going to be net score. And LSU, net of 27. They didn't have any bad quad 4 losses. They had the 1 bad loss to Vanderbilt, which is still considered a quad 3. East Tennessee State is quad 2, although since then they've come up to a quad 1. So they don't have any quad 2 or quad 4 losses. They just have the 1, as of this one. They only have the 1 quad 3 loss, and yes, they've had a little bit of the tailspin to where Alabama's gotten better. So their win against Alabama looks better. Their win against Arkansas and Florida looks better, even though they have another loss to Florida that doesn't look as good. And, so on and so forth. And, as of February 12th, whenever the initial top 16 came out, they were a 6 seed. And this is whenever they were still on, like, they just lost their first 2 SEC games, so it's at the point where they still had high marks, and yes, people were still in shock mode for Vanderbilt, but the fact that they almost beat Auburn, and they really could have beaten Auburn, it's like you still felt pretty good about them, and the brackets showed that. Now, just to kind of make it a little bit straightforward, instead of seeing all those numbers together, just for an easier state going through quad 1 through quad 4. It's going to be separated through, like if you're the home team, you're going to have to get, you have to go against teams and win against teams that have a net of number 1 to number 30. And 1 through 50 if in a neutral game, 1 through 35 in an away game. And kind of so on and so forth with quad 2, 31 to 75 is also include. Well, no. My apologies. 31 through 75 is quad 2, 51 to 100 is quad 2 in neutral, and 76 to 135 is quad 2 in away games. So on and so forth to where you don't want to have any of those quad 3 losses. And the quad 3 and quad 4 team losses are going to make it to where you're more likely to miss all tournaments. Now, yeah, comparing it to the RPI system, this is going off of last year's because of the fact that last year was the first time that they switched from RPI to this current net system. It does look a little jumbled, but last year's, just going with the Big 12 in this case, like Kansas right now is the number 1 seed overall. They're number 1 seed in net. They're number 1 seed in RPI. That's not changing. But last year, Kansas was number 1 in RPI, but they're near around 20 in net because they had a lot of games where like they weren't the most efficient team offensively. They would have a lot of close games, and then they just knew they were clutch down the stretch. So they got knocked a bit more on that, and if you go back to Texas Tech on it, Texas Tech ended up being a 3 seed. They made the Final Four. If you see a net off of 11 in that case, that like a 3 seed would be around the 9 to 12 range on net. It's not going to be exact, but it's going to be around the area. So yeah, the differences on this year's is like this on the very right is how, yeah, as of the first rankings this year with the top 16, the top 4 seeds this year with the net rankings, San Diego State, Gonzaga, Baylor, and Kansas. If you actually look at the RPI rankings, Maryland, Auburn, and Duke would be number 1 seeds in that case. Kansas would still be the 1 seed, but they're also considered to be the number 1 overall seed. Auburn was picked as a 4 seed at that moment, and that point was around February 12th. Maryland at the time was around a 4 seed. Duke is a 2 seed, but with the RPI stretch, they blew out a lot of teams. Their offensive efficiency wasn't really taken too much into factor, but they had a strong, Maryland, Duke, and Auburn could always build themselves off of a strong strength schedule. They would have a good bit of blowouts, and they're able to build off of those to get themselves higher up on it. So it kind of made it a bit easier. It makes it a little bit more clear, so they're not just taking into account of 20 or 30-point blowouts where it's like you're going to get subs. You're going to get a lot of a lot of the subs that barely play towards the latter part of the game. That's not really going to factor. And it's also going to take into account somewhat on injuries, not too much, but some to the fact to where, if they could have won with this top guy back or this certain starter back. But this is actually the current field as of yesterday, February 29th. So with this, I'll go over a couple situations where it's like the difference between the 1 seeds and the 2 seeds based off of a couple criterias and with the last 4 and the first 4 out, just for the fact that just to kind of see a difference on what the committee is seeing and what you could expect to what a couple certain factors that could end up going around and altering this bracket as the tournaments come up. As we're only a couple, at this point, we're actually only 2 games away from the conference tournaments coming up, and for some teams, the conference tournaments is about to start, especially all the mid-majors. Those are probably going to start this coming weekend. But in this case, let's start with the top seeds. And you have Kansas, San Diego State, Baylor, and Gonzaga. No surprise. The net rankings, it's all going to be very similar to what they're actually projecting out on as the top 4 overall seeds. The only one that's left out is the number 3 seed of the number 3 rank of the net rankings over the top 4. And Baylor's in that place because there's still a little bit of bias off of power conferences, but it's not so much to where you can't really fault them. And Baylor has played a stronger schedule than the number 3 net ranking, Dayton. Although Dayton has had definitely a very impressive resume as well. Now, I separated this off of the top 2. The top rankings are the Quad 1, Quad 2 rankings, and in parentheses is all the Quad 1 wins. So that's going to be the top 30 home, the top 50 neutral, and the top 75 road games. And then Quad 3, Quad 4 on the bottom part of it, as Kansas was 6-0 against Quad 3, Quad 4 with no Quad 4 losses in that case. And that's going to be very common on this stretch because most of these teams, all their losses are going to be in Quad 1, Quad 2. San Diego State, they just lost their first game of this season just a week ago, so they got knocked a little bit, but they didn't lose far enough to be able to get hit out of the top 4. But overall, they had, if you see the difference between them and Kansas has 23 of their 29 games that are the top 2 quad wins. So they're playing quality competition throughout. So as of this point, you could call, they're probably the favorite to win the whole thing. And once the brackets do come out, I will be doing a reaction to it and maybe put a little bit of money on the line. I might do a bit of a bracket challenge. Nothing too substantial because this channel is still too small to be able to put the big money on it. I ain't too much of a gambler, but it's fun with these. I like a little competition with it. But back on the subject, San Diego State, more than half their games are in the Quad 2, the Quad 3, Quad 4, with their only loss to being to UNLV, who's a Quad 3 team. They're around 100 in, 108 in the net rank, but it was also a home game, so you have to mark that off as Quad 3. Baylor on the other hand, a little bit more towards favor of the Quad 1, Quad 2 with 10 Quad 1 wins, where at different points of the time they were the number 1 seed, but with a loss to Kansas. They've split between Kansas and Baylor. Baylor has made Kansas lose their only conference game, but not enough to be able to take them out. At this point, San Diego State would be the 4 seed. Baylor would be the 2. Gonzaga would be the 3. And Gonzaga actually worse, more in the same case of than San Diego State. They have 10 games that they've played in the top 2 quadrants, with 6 of those being in Quad 1, a little bit more than San Diego State. Most of those A lot of those wins by San Diego State are barely in the quad 2 range, so a lot of them are around 75 to 100 on road games and 50 to 75 with away game. 50 to 75 with home games and 75 to 100 on away games. But Gonzaga has a little more experience with the top level teams, and definitely actually a little more experience against the bottom of the barrel, because West Coast Conference is not going to give great competition, except for their 2 losses, one against BYU, and they have one actually out of conference that was against Duke, but a very competitive game in that case. Now, the 2 seeds for the ones being able to try and catch up with them, you have Maryland, Dayton, Florida State, and Duke. Now, I am basing all of this off of Lenardi's most recent bracketology. He does good stuff. Between him, Andy Katz, it's tough to keep up with all of that and be able to understand, and distinguish between all of them, but this is just a smaller percentage of it. But as I was saying earlier, Dayton has the number 3 net rank. They're a very solid season. Right now, between them and Duke are the top 2 expected that could jump up to that 1 seed, even though Duke has kind of gone down a little bit over the past week, having struggles against Florida State, Syracuse, and a little bit more trouble in conference than most of these top teams. Now, the one thing on Maryland, they're kind of the lowest of these. Maryland and Florida State, those are the 2 that have the double-digit net ranks. So they're winning a lot of close games. They're not getting a bunch of the scoring margin values. More on Maryland in that case, as them and Duke have the same record, so all 3 of them are ACC teams, so they're all kind of competing with each other in the same field. So I don't expect all of it to stay the same, but Duke has name recognition that's going to keep them up there. It's not the biggest factor, because you've seen Duke be down as a 3 seed at times, 1, 2, and 3 seed for the most part, but Krzyzewski's been very solid every year that he's been there, it feels like. But Maryland has 11 of their 19 top 100 games they've played have been quad 1 victories. Definitely more than Dayton, Florida State, and Duke. You can almost argue that why their net rank is that low for that case. But for the fact of them being in the Big Ten, they get a lot of those opportunities, especially on the road games, to be able to build up some of those lower 75, lower part of the top 75 that they can kind of grind on with, like the Illinois, the Purdue's, I'm not going to say Michigan State because they're really good. Yeah, Illinois, Indiana, Purdue, Michigan, the middling teams that are battling for seeding that should make the tournament, but how high a seeding still kind of in question. Yeah, Dayton with Obi Toppin, potentially the National Player of the Year. They've lost both of their games in as top quad 1 or quad 2 competition. One against Kansas and one against another fairly strong team in Colorado. So none of these teams have any bad losses. But as I said, Dayton Dayton could rise up if like San Diego State falters during their tournament, or same thing with Gonzaga. Seems like Gonzaga has more of a leg up on them because I don't think they really want to have 3 mid-majors in as the top 4 seeds. They want to have a little bit more variety with it. Now on the teams that are still fighting to actually make the tournament at all. The last 4 in being Oklahoma, Providence, USC, and NC State. And you see the net rankings are definitely a lot lower. So this is around the range of most of the teams have to expect to get an at-large bid. Because with 68 teams, there is all the conference tournaments. There's 32 conference tournaments in general, so in that case, there's going to be 36 at-large spots. And not all of the probably a good third to half of the teams that win the conference tournaments are already going to make the NCAA tournament anyway. So if you really end up counting off of that, then if you end up only basing it on the net ranking, then let's just say 16 of them. 16 of the conference championships would have already made it at large bids if they didn't win their conference. So that's going to end up leaving, you have 52 at-large spots left in that case. So 16 from the teams that will have already made it without a conference championship, and 36 from the ones that are actually the at-larges. So in that case, you're going to have ones that are going to be very close to this, from that 36 to 52 range that more likely are going to be the top teams expected to actually make it. So the problem with some of these teams that are there, they're really on the bubble, is that, at least in Providence's case, Providence has 4 losses in with the bottom quad 3, quad 4. Yes, they do play in a conference that has a bit lower bottom teams. Arguably, you can also put USC in that case as well, because Pac-12 has been down as of recency bias. But it's like to kind of counteract that, they do have 6 quad 1 wins. 6 of their 11 top 100 wins, 6 of them are quad 1. And as you're going down, 12 top 100 wins for Oklahoma, 5 of them quad 1, and so on and so forth with it. Now at the NC State, they have at 18-11, 9-9 conference. There's going to be, at this point, a lot of the brackets are seeing either 4 or 5 ACC teams getting in, between Duke, Louisville, and Florida State at the top as like top 2 or 3 seeds up there. And then Virginia is going to be around an 8 or 9. If you're getting a 5th seed off of it, a 5th team off of it, it would be NC State, because they actually have some quality wins. With a win at Syracuse, with a blowout win against Duke, and a win at Virginia. USC at their case, they have their best win against LSU amongst their 4 quad 1 wins. Now for the ones that are just on the outside in, with Stanford, Richmond, Mississippi State, and UCLA, you see the net rankings on here. UCLA is all the way down at 75, but it almost feels like they're trying to take into account that UCLA is top in the conference, so they could almost see them as making the tournament, not as an at-large, but potentially winning the conference. Yes, they've kind of built up on some bottom feeders as Oregon State's not great, Washington State's not great, Utah's all right. You have Oregon, you have Colorado, and you have USC as your top 3 teams in the Pac-12. And then Arizona and Arizona State also being in there. So, but the one thing that both both them and Richmond do have in common also, they have multiple quad 3 losses, quad 3 and quad 4 losses, one each by both of them, and one bad quad 4 loss. UCLA losing to Hofstra, and Richmond losing to Radford. And with the other cases for Stanford and Mississippi State, it would be the 5th SEC team after Kentucky, Auburn, Florida, and LSU. They have they have 9 top 100 wins, but SEC's been kind of down, especially the lower part of the conference. Like 5 of those wins were all against the lower part of the SEC that still end up being in the top 100, but just kind of barely on the fringe of it. So, and really nothing in the non-conference. The only quality game they really played was a loss against Villanova. So there's not really that much they have that can stand out against some of these bigger teams, against the ones with a better net. So like the lower net's going to end up making it to show where either it's going to be close games, it's going to be close games, it's going to be win percentage issues, which in this case Mississippi State and UCLA have more of an issue than like USC. Then you'll have they're winning a lot of their home games that they should win, that are against decent if not great opponents. They haven't shown great on the road, but once they go into their respective conference tournaments, there is potential for all of these teams and a few more still on the bubble that could end up making the tournament. But once that happens, this will be a fun last couple of weeks before the NCAA tournament gets started. But as we stand, this is the current bracket on it. You'll get the favorites here being probably Kansas and Baylor and Gonzaga, and Duke. A lot of people end up picking out of that west part of the division, especially for the fact that there's not a lot of people who like to end up going for those mid-majors early on to end up making it all the way. And in this case, it's a lot of mid-majors more than usual. And that is kind of what the net is supposed to end up helping with. Like a lot of the end up power teams end up having like 17-13 records at times, or 18-14 records. And just because you play in a power conference doesn't mean you're going to deserve to be in all the time, even if you're just like right in the middle. Like in this year, the SEC is down, the ACC is down. The Big Ten is potentially going to get 10 or 11 teams. The Big 12, the Big 12 is also expected to get around 5 teams. Now, I do understand that with college basketball, it is kind of a Big 6 because the Big East still is. They're holding their weight over some of these other Power 5 conferences from all the other major sports. Because they're predicted to have 7 right now in the league, in the tournament. But this is going to be a fun one once it actually comes up. Now, thank y'all for watching all of this. I hope y'all enjoyed it. If y'all have any more questions on it, please leave anything in the comments down below. Please let anyone, please like and subscribe. Share this out to other people. Anyone interested in college basketball, I want to be able to go more in depth with this. But with that being said, I am the Contained Kunas. This is Stat 7 Sports, and I'll see y'all next time.